Hi, I'm Megan Bell, the librarian for the School of Health Professions, and this video will show you how to construct a systematic review search. I'm going to go over the steps to do a systematic review search. I'm going to talk to you about where to search for articles, where to search for keywords and synonyms for keywords. I'm going to go over where to search for subject terms and explain what does that mean, what are subject terms. We're going to talk about how to use and, or, and not to construct your search. And finally, we're going to put it all together and help you come up with a search strategy. There are 3 steps to search for a systematic review. One is identifying keywords. Next, you use those keywords as well as synonyms and subject terms. And finally, you combine them all together with connectors and, or, and not. So where do you search for articles in a systematic review? Well, some researchers, there were some librarians who do systematic reviews often, and they wanted to come up with what's the best return on investment as far as your time and your resources when it comes to putting together a systematic review. And so they tested a search for the health sciences in several databases. They can try different combinations, and here's what they came up with. In this order: PubMed, Embase, Web of Science, and Google Scholar. As you progress down the list, you will get less and less unique articles, but this should get you the best return on investment in the health sciences, just depending on your topic. But for most topics, it'll probably get you the best return on investment. They also said that if your search is about psychology or behavioral sciences or counseling or something like that, you can add in PsycInfo, and if your search involves physical therapy, you can add in Sports Discus. So why am I giving you so many options? Well, when you're doing a systematic review, you're doing a comprehensive search, or you should be doing a comprehensive search. And so you want to search as many places as possible. You want to get as many relevant articles to your topic as possible. Think about the articles that are relevant to your topic as the little dots that are on this picture. And think about the circles as being databases. So notice that no circle has all of the dots in it, just as no database has all of the articles. And so that's why you want to search multiple ones. Also notice that some of the circles overlap. And so that means you will get some duplicates, but you're also going to get some unique ones that are out there as well. Another reason for searching different databases is that the databases are programmed differently. So you can do a very similar search in 2 databases and get different results. And it has to do with sometimes just the programming of the database as well as just what's included in the database. You always want to start on the library's the library's homepage to access databases. Even if it's PubMed and Google Scholar, you still want to start on the library's homepage so that you're recognized as being a UAB person and you can have access to the things you've already paid for. I do recommend creating accounts with the databases that you use for several reasons. One reason is that for example, in PubMed, by default, it'll save your search for about 8 hours, but this is going to be a trial and error process. So you may be working on your searches over a course of a couple of days. You may work on it for a while, come back to it. And so if you are logged in, it'll save the searches that you did, and you can go back. If you forget what you did, you can go back and review the searches that you performed and pick the one that got you the best results. Another reason is that for some databases, you have to be logged in order to send the citations from the database into EndNote. So that's another reason. And a third reason is that you will need to update your searches. So maybe 6 months after you started your project and you're about to conclude your manuscript. And so sometimes you may want to rerun your search to see if anything new has come out before you submit it for publication. So if you already have created an account and your search is already saved there, it's really quick to just rerun the search, so it can save you some time. So your research question, we're going to get started on just walking you through step by step how to create this search. So here's an actual question that a rehab science student had. And her question was, for children diagnosed with CVI, what has been the path to diagnosis and rehabilitation or treatment? Now, I'm going to be honest with you, this is a scoping review question, it's not a systematic review question. However, whether you're doing a scoping review or a systematic review, the process to construct a search is the same. So we can still use this for our purposes. The first thing we need to do is identify what are the keywords of our question. So let's talk about what are keywords. So keywords mean what are the main ideas that you want to make sure that article has when you retrieve them. What the articles you retrieve, what main ideas do you want to make sure they have? And so in order to come up with that, you think about what are the keywords that are in my search question. For this, I came up with CVI is a keyword. I want to make sure the article talks about CVI. Also, diagnosis, rehabilitation, treatment, and intervention. And those are all in the same box because for her search, she could retrieve the word, any of those concepts could be used, and she wanted to retrieve those articles. And finally, children. She wanted to have the population had to be children. So next, we've identified our keywords. Now we want to use those keywords as well as possibly maybe some synonyms for those keywords and some subject terms as well to help us construct our search. So keyword searching is just when you use your natural language in order to find articles, and you're hoping that authors have used those words in the title or the abstract. Now there are some pros and cons to doing a keyword search. One good thing is that because you get to use the natural language to find articles, that it makes it pretty easy. Another thing is that it searches across multiple fields, and we'll talk more about that in a few slides. Also, it may be truncated for searching on word variation. So again, we'll talk about that in a few more slides. It may be used in combination with other keywords or synonyms. It may be used to find information on current subjects or trends. So there may be a new way, new thing, new concept that's out there, and you can just put in that word or phrase to try to see has anyone published on that topic. And you use keywords to help you find subject terms. Again, we'll talk about that in a few slides. Some disadvantages are that results are often too broad, returning irrelevant results, because they're not indexed to specific fields. And sometimes multiple terms are needed in order to find relevant results. So here's our first pass through. I put in CVI, and in parentheses I have diagnosis or rehabilitation or treatment or intervention, and then I have close parentheses and I have and children. So I retrieved over 700 results because PubMed is searching for the words in all fields. So let's talk about what does all fields mean. So by default, when you search in a database, it has divided that record into title, author, abstract, journal, all those different things. And when it searches all fields, that means it's looking for that word, for example, CVI or diagnosis, it's looking for it in all of those places at the same time. So that's why I received so many results, because it searched for that word in all of those places at the same time. So also notice the and ors. So let's talk about that. So or is used to expand your search. So I'm telling the database, if you find the word diagnosis, or if you find any of these words, diagnosis, treatment, rehabilitation, intervention, and if you find any of those words, I want you to retrieve that. So I use or to communicate that to the database. And it's used to restrict my results. So I'm telling the database, you have to pull in, it has to have CVI and it has to have children. So it's only going to give me the things that are in between. And then finally, not. So not needs to be used carefully. Not is when there's a broader concept and then there's a more specific concept in that broader concept, and you only wanted to retrieve, there are certain aspects of the broader concept you don't want. So you can say diabetes, not hypertension, or if your concept was children, maybe you can say children, not infants. So it just kind of depends on what you're looking for. I'm going to go back here. One more concept I want to explain to you are the parentheses. So think about math. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, where you go inside the parentheses and then you go outside of the parentheses. So the parentheses tell a database, you look inside, and if you see any of these words, you retrieve that. So it tells it to focus on that particular thing and then go outside of that parentheses. So going back to field searching again, talking about that, we talked about how if you don't put anything behind the words, by default, the database will search everywhere at one time. But on the other hand, I can tell the database to look in specific places for the words. So in this particular search, I told the database, look in the title and abstract. So in PubMed, when you put in TIAB in brackets, it tells PubMed to look for those words in the title and the abstract. And notice when I did that, I retrieved 91 results. So before I retrieved 700, now I retrieved 91. So I'm getting a lot less results, but they're probably more relevant results. I can also tell the database only look in the title. And so here's what I did. I told it to only look for those words in the title, and this time I get 0 results. So I can also mix it up by searching for the words, sometimes only in the title, sometimes only in the abstract, so I have different options. Now, one thing we need to keep in mind is that they won't always say the words that we say. So they're not always going to say CVI. Sometimes they're going to spell it out. They may not always say children. Sometimes they may say child or infant or preschooler. There's so many different ways they can think of it. So one thing I usually mention to students is look at the middle of this picture. It's a cold winter day. And on the right and the left are things that you can use to keep your legs warm, such as sweater tights. And when I ask students to describe what they're seeing to me, they'll say sweater tights, they'll say stockings, leggings, pantyhose, things like that. And so we're looking at the same picture, but we're finding different words to describe the concept. And authors who are publishing on your topic are doing the same thing. They may find other words to describe the concept you're thinking about. So that's why it's important to kind of brainstorm synonyms and include those synonyms in your search. So where do you look for synonyms? Some of it will come from your clinical expertise. You know what people in your field tend to say or how they tend to describe certain things. So some of it will come from that. Some of it may come from websites. You may just go to a search engine, type in a particular word or a phrase, and see what else comes up. Sometimes I'll even put in the word synonym behind it just to see what words come up. So I'm just trying to brainstorm synonyms. Sometimes it may come from review articles, so you can look at other systematic reviews and see what words they use to describe the concept. You can also use a database thesaurus, and in PubMed, a database thesaurus is called MESH. And you can also use, maybe you have a reading in one of your classes and you all were discussing that concept, and you may come up with some words from that as well. So first, let's talk about websites. So in a search engine, I just put in CVI to see what will come up, and I see that some authors may say CVI, but another way is just to spell it out and say cerebral visual impairment or cortical visual impairment. So I'm going to add that to my list of possible synonyms. Also, I can look for some review articles to see what did other people use when they described and they did a search for CVI. So again, I mentioned that you can use those tags and brackets, TI in a bracket. It tells it to look for CVI in the title. Also, a systematic review, they usually are going to say, if it is a systematic review, they will say systematic review in the title. So I can use the TI function for that as well, and look in PubMed for articles, systematic reviews on CVI. And when I find one, I go to full text. And then when I get to the full text, I'm either going to look in the methods section, or I'll look in their supplementary materials section to see if they have given their search strategy in an appendix. And so for this particular article, they do give the search strategy in their appendix, so I would check that out to see if they have any words there that I can use. Another thing I can use is go in the database thesaurus, and in PubMed it's called MESH. So here's the home page of PubMed. I look in the lower right, and it has the MESH database. I click on that. From there, it takes me here, and I can go concept by concept and put in the keyword in the subject in the search box. From there, it takes me here. So whatever word I put in is going to find MESH terms that may match that. So it's very important that I read the definition of what PubMed means when it uses that label, and then I pick the one that's the most relevant to me. So I look for diagnosis. The first definition is the most relevant to me. So I click on that record. And then from there, there's a lot of information in this record, but for this particular purpose, when I'm looking for synonyms, I want to focus on the bottom portion that says entry terms, and that gives me some ideas on some entry terms, on some synonyms that I can use for my topic. So in this particular thing, I noticed that diagnosis may be spelled with an I or an E, so I'll probably want to include both of those in my search. Also notice that some of them may give you the words in inverted order. Ignore the inverted order, only put it in the natural way people would say it, because you're telling the database to actually look for that word or phrase in the title or the abstract, and they're not going to put it in inverted order in their title or abstract. So only pick the ones that are in natural order. So using the things that I've just given you, here are some ideas that I came up with. So we have cerebral visual impairment, cortical visual impairment, cerebral blind. So we talked about the truncation a little bit. So I'm going to give you an example here. So here's truncation. So you have the root word, and then you put an asterisk on the end, and it pulls in multiple endings. So going back here, when I have cerebral and I have blind with an asterisk, it'll pull in blind or blindness. Same thing with impair or impairment. So it'll pull in multiple endings for it. And going back here as well, going back to more tools, notice that there are the, you can put the dash and the asterisk together. So if you use a dash between the words in PubMed, it tells it to look for it as a phrase. It means those words have to be right next to each other. So I have music dash therapy with the asterisk on the end, so I'll pull in music therapy as well as therapies. Same thing here. The dash is telling it to pull in the words. The words have to be right next to each other, and then it adds the truncation on the end, so it'll pull in multiple endings. So if I diagnosis, rehabilitation, treatment, I thought about other words, so I can say diagnosis could also be detection. I have diagnose, could be bringing in multiple endings. Treats, treatment, therapy, rehab, assessment, support. Those are all different words I came up with that are the type of articles she wanted. And then for children, we have different spelling of children. We have juvenile, youth, all these different ways of things are describe the same concept that we're looking for. So now we've brainstormed keywords and synonyms. Now we're going to talk about subject terms, and what does that even mean? So think about subject terms are special vocabulary attached to articles, and they describe the main idea of that article. Think of them as being labels that are attached to that article. So someone has read that article, and they said, this article is about diabetes. This article is about children. This article is about a stroke, whatever. And so, when doing a systematic review search, it's important to use the keywords. The keywords mean they have to use that exact word in a title or abstract. The label means regardless of what word they actually use, if the article is about that particular topic, then that label is attached to it, and you'll get anything in the database that has that label attached to it. So what are some advantages and disadvantages? Some advantages is that you will get relevant results. If the article is labeled as being about diabetes, and it will be about diabetes. You can also, if you look in the record, they'll have what's called a concept tree, and you can see things that are a broader concept or a more narrow concept, and that can kind of help you refine your results. It'll also give you ideas for related terms that you may want to add to your search. It will retrieve all items in the database indexed with that subject term. But a bad thing is that it won't take advantage of recently coined things. So if it's a new concept, it may not have a mesh term. Also be aware that not everything has a mesh term, period. And also it takes time for them to attach the label to the article. So if something was published last week on your topic, it's not going to have a mesh term yet. Where do you find subject terms? If you are in PubMed, it's called Mesh. If you're in Embase, it's called Emtree. And if you're in Sports Discuss or PsycInfo, it's going to be a thesaurus. So how do you find them? So you're on the home page of PubMed. You go to the Mesh database. There are two ways to find a subject term. One way is to type in the keyword into your search box. You get a list of results. You read the definition to make sure it's what you want. And then you go to the record And this term at the top that has the red arrow pointing to it, that's the actual mesh term. And when you include it in your search, for example, for this one, you would write diagnosis and you'll put mesh in brackets. That's the actual mesh term. Option 2 is to take whatever the concept is and you put title, you look for that word or phrase in the title, and then you find mesh terms you find what mesh terms are associated with those articles. So here's an example. I want to know what mesh term is associated with CVI. So I search for CVI in the title. I set the display format to abstract. And when I do that, I'll see the abstract all on one page. And so I look at the bottom, I look at the record, and I see that any mesh terms, I can expand this to find the mesh terms. So here's an example of one that has CVI, and when I look at the mesh terms, it looks like vision disorders associated with the concept of CVI. So that would be the mesh term for it. And so I decide whether I want to use it. I can click on that particular record and read the definition of vision disorder to see if I want to include that in my search. So I put this together. So now I have a table that has my keywords, my synonyms, and my subject terms. And so now it's time for me to put all those things together. Here is my final PubMed search. So I decided to search for some of my words in the title. Well, I decided to search for my words in the title, and I also decided to search for them in the mesh terms as well. And then notice I have them in parentheses. I'm telling the database, you look here, or if you retreat, look here first, and then you look in the next set of parentheses, and then you look in the next set of parentheses. So in PubMed, you could put TI for title, or you can actually spell out title. So once I have this final PubMed search, this is going to be my template that I'm going to use to search all the other databases. So once I look at the results from this search, and if the results are relevant and they're pretty good results, I'll use that as my template to search all the other databases such as Embase and Web of Science and Google Scholar and things like that.